Why do men keep making the same mistakes with women? Generation after generation, the same patterns repeat. Men pursue, they invest, they commit, and then they're blindsided by outcomes they never saw coming. They give everything, only to be left confused about what went wrong. And the advice they get, communicate better, be more attentive, show more emotion, somehow makes things worse. What if the problem isn't that men aren't trying hard enough? What if it's that they're operating from a fundamentally flawed understanding of female nature itself? By the end of this video, you'll understand what Arthur Schopenhauer discovered about women that changes everything. A truth so uncomfortable that most people refuse to even consider it. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And more importantly, you'll finally understand why your previous approaches failed and what you need to do differently. But before we get there, we need to understand something crucial. Why has this knowledge been so deliberately hidden? And to understand that, we first need to look at what Schopenhauer actually said and why it caused such outrage. Schopenhauer didn't write about women to be provocative. He wrote from observation. Decades of watching human behavior, studying history, examining the patterns that repeat across cultures and centuries. And what he concluded went against everything society wanted to believe. He argued that men and women don't just have different preferences. They have fundamentally different natures, different biological imperatives, different psychological structures, and most critically, different relationships to truth itself. Now, before you dismiss this as outdated philosophy from the 1800s, consider this. Schopenhauer's observations have been repeatedly validated by modern evolutionary psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral economics. The language has changed, but the patterns he identified remain constant. The reason his work remains controversial isn't because it's wrong. It's because it's uncomfortable. It challenges the romantic narratives we're taught. It dismantles the illusions that make relationships feel safe and predictable. It forces men to see dynamics they'd rather ignore. Most men go through life operating from what Schopenhauer called the romantic illusion. They believe that women want the same things they want, that female attraction works the same way as male attraction, that honesty, loyalty, and consistency are universally valued traits. And this belief destroys them because they make decisions based on false assumptions. They interpret female behavior through a male lens. They apply male logic to female psychology. And then they're shocked when nothing works the way it's supposed to. Think about the typical male approach to relationships. He finds a woman attractive. He pursues her honestly. He demonstrates his value through achievement, character, and commitment. He believes that if he's good enough, consistent enough, devoted enough, she'll recognize his worth and reciprocate with loyalty and appreciation. This seems logical. It's how men evaluate each other. It's how male hierarchies function. But Schopenhauer understood something most men never grasp. Women don't operate on this framework. They can't. Their biological imperatives create an entirely different set of priorities. And here's where most men make their first critical error. They assume that because women say they want certain things, honesty, emotional availability, respect, that providing these things will generate attraction and loyalty. But Schopenhauer observed a pattern that confused most men of his era and still confuses men today. What women say they want and what actually generates their attraction are often completely opposite. Not because women are lying, but because they themselves don't understand their own nature. This is the key insight that unlocks everything. Women are driven by imperatives they're not consciously aware of. Biological programs running beneath rational thought. And these programs often contradict their stated preferences, their conscious beliefs, even their own self-image. A woman can genuinely believe she wants a kind, stable, emotionally available man. And she does want these things, but only under very specific conditions. Only in combination with other traits, only at certain times. And the moment those conditions change, her feelings change, often dramatically, leaving the man completely confused about what happened. Schopenhauer wasn't criticizing women for this. He was describing a feature of their nature, one that serves a biological purpose, one that ensured their ancestors' survival, but one that creates tremendous confusion for men who don't understand it. So what exactly did Schopenhauer discover? What is this hidden aspect of female nature that men keep missing? To understand that, we need to look at what he called the will to life and how it expresses itself differently in men and women. And that's where things get really interesting. Schopenhauer's entire philosophy rested on one central concept: the will to life, a blind, unconscious force that drives all living things toward survival and reproduction. Not a conscious choice, not a rational decision, an instinctual imperative operating beneath awareness. But here's what he discovered that changes everything. This will expresses itself differently in men and women, not just in degree, but in kind. And understanding this difference is the key to understanding female behavior that otherwise makes no sense. For men, the will to life is relatively straightforward. Spread genetic material as widely as possible. Compete for status and resources that enable reproduction. Protect offspring to ensure genetic continuation. These drives are direct, obvious, and relatively consistent. But for women, the calculation is infinitely more complex. A woman's reproductive investment is massive. Pregnancy, childbirth, years of vulnerability while raising offspring. She can't pursue quantity the way men can. She has to pursue quality. And this creates an entirely different psychological structure. Schopenhauer observed that women are biologically programmed to be perpetual evaluators, not just at the beginning of a relationship, but constantly. Because in evolutionary terms, selecting the wrong male didn't just mean personal disappointment. It meant potential death for her and her offspring. So nature installed in women a mechanism that never stops assessing. Is this man still the best option available? Has his status declined? Is there a superior alternative? Are his genes actually as strong as they initially appeared? Can he still provide resources and protection? This isn't conscious scheming, it's biological programming. An unconscious process running in the background at all times, and it creates behavior that men find baffling and often interpret as betrayal or irrationality. But before we explore what this actually looks like in practice, you need to understand something even deeper: why women themselves don't recognize this pattern in their own behavior. And this is where Schopenhauer's insight becomes truly profound. He argued that women have what he called a natural talent for dissimulation, not because they're intentionally deceptive, but because their survival historically depended on it. A woman who couldn't mask her true feelings, who couldn't adapt her behavior to circumstances, who couldn't maintain multiple potential options while appearing committed to one, was at a severe disadvantage. So women evolved an extraordinary ability to believe their own rationalizations, to genuinely feel emotions that serve strategic purposes, to be unaware of their own motivations even as they act on them. This is why asking a woman what she wants is often useless. She'll tell you what she consciously believes, but her behavior will be driven by unconscious imperatives she can't articulate and may not even recognize. Schopenhauer noticed this in countless ways. A woman would claim to value stability, then leave a stable man for an exciting one. She'd insist loyalty was paramount, then betray a loyal man who lost status. She'd say she wanted emotional availability, then lose attraction to men who provided it. The disconnect wasn't dishonesty. It was the gap between conscious preference and unconscious drive. And men who didn't understand this gap made catastrophic errors. They took female words at face value. They believed that meeting stated needs would generate lasting satisfaction. They thought consistency and logic would be rewarded with loyalty. And they were destroyed when reality didn't match this framework. Here's what Schopenhauer understood that most men still miss. Female attraction isn't about fairness or logic or deserving. It's about biology. And biology doesn't care about your feelings, your efforts, or your moral character. It cares about genetic outcomes. A woman is attracted to markers of genetic quality and resource provision, strength, status, dominance, pre-selection by other women, emotional stability under pressure. These traits signal to her unconscious biology that you're a high-value reproductive option. But here's the cruel part. The moment you fully commit, the moment you make yourself completely available and devoted, many of these signals diminish. The strength appears as submission. The stability appears as predictability. The devotion appears as lower value because high-value men, in biological terms, shouldn't be so available. This is the paradox that destroys most men. What secures commitment often undermines attraction. What demonstrates love often reduces desire. What proves loyalty often generates contempt, and women don't do this maliciously. They're as confused by it as men are. They genuinely don't understand why they lose attraction to men who give them everything they asked for. Because the asking came from conscious thought, but the attraction comes from unconscious biology. So how does this actually play out? What does this look like in real relationships? That's what we need to examine next. Schopenhauer identified specific patterns in female behavior that repeat across time and culture. Patterns most men notice but can't explain. And once you see them clearly, they change how you interpret everything. The first pattern he called the worship trap. Watch what happens when a man places a woman on a pedestal, when he treats her as perfect, special, above him in value. She might enjoy it initially. The attention feels good. The devotion is flattering. But over time, something shifts. She becomes critical, irritable, distant. She starts testing him, pushing boundaries, creating conflict. And the more he responds with patience and understanding, the worse it gets. Why? Because worship signals low value. In biological terms, high-status males don't worship. They select. They appreciate, but don't idealize. When you worship her, you're communicating that she's above your league. And this creates not gratitude but contempt. Schopenhauer observed that women are attracted to men who treat them well but not worshipfully. Men who appreciate them but don't need them. Men who would be fine without them. This paradox confuses most men because it seems to contradict everything they've been taught about how to show love. But it's not a contradiction, it's biology. Her unconscious is asking, if he worships me this much, what does that say about his options? If I'm the best he can do, am I settling by being with him? The second pattern Schopenhauer identified is even more brutal. The punishment of virtue. Men who are excessively honest, loyal, and accommodating often fare worse in relationships than men who are selectively dishonest, occasionally distant, and boundary enforcing. This makes no rational sense. Why would good behavior be punished while bad behavior is rewarded? But Schopenhauer understood that morality and attraction are separate systems. Morality serves social cohesion. Attraction serves reproduction. And these imperatives often conflict. A man who never challenges her, never disagrees, never enforces boundaries, appears weak. Not morally weak, but genetically weak. His agreeableness signals that he's afraid of losing her, which signals that he couldn't easily replace her, which signals lower value. Meanwhile, a man who occasionally creates distance, who doesn't always accommodate, who maintains his own frame even when it creates tension, demonstrates something biology responds to: strength, options, high value. Women consciously resent this. They'll complain about men who are difficult, unavailable, or challenging. But unconsciously, they often remain more attracted to these men than to the ones who are perfectly accommodating. But before you conclude that you need to become manipulative or play games, understand this. Schopenhauer wasn't advocating for deception. He was advocating for awareness. Understanding these patterns allows you to make informed choices instead of being controlled by dynamics you don't see. The third pattern he observed is what modern psychology calls hypergamy, but Schopenhauer described as perpetual dissatisfaction with equivalence. A woman is rarely satisfied with a man who's merely equal to her in value. She's biologically driven to secure a man who's above her in status, resources, or genetic quality. This creates an impossible situation, because the moment she succeeds in securing a higher value man, she becomes his equal through association. And equality for her unconscious biology feels like settling. This is why improving yourself to keep a woman often fails. You increase your value, but her standards increase proportionally. You're running faster just to stay in place, because her biology isn't asking, is he good enough? It's asking, is he the best I can get? Schopenhauer saw this drive as the source of perpetual female restlessness in relationships, not a character flaw, but a feature, one that kept women evaluating, comparing, remaining open to better options. Because in evolutionary terms, complacency was dangerous. A woman who stopped assessing her male's relative value might miss signs of his decline. She might fail to notice when better options became available. So nature installed a mechanism that prevents complete satisfaction, a low-grade discontent that ensures she never stops evaluating. This explains why meeting her needs doesn't create lasting peace. New needs emerge. The bar rises. What satisfied yesterday becomes insufficient today, not because you failed, but because the system is designed to be insatiable. So what does this mean for how men should actually approach relationships? That's the question we need to address next. But the answer isn't what most men expect. Most men respond to these patterns in one of two ways. Either they try harder, becoming even more accommodating, more devoted, more self-sacrificing, or they become bitter, concluding that all women are impossible and relationships are inherently destructive. Schopenhauer would tell you both responses are traps, because both accept the same flawed premise that female satisfaction is the goal, that if she's not satisfied, something is wrong that needs fixing. But what if her perpetual dissatisfaction isn't a problem to solve? What if it's simply a biological constant to acknowledge and then ignore? This is the reframe that changes everything. And to understand how to actually apply it, we first need to look at what Schopenhauer called the sovereignty of the masculine frame. He observed that men who maintained their own sense of purpose, direction, and worth independent of female approval fared dramatically better in relationships, not because they didn't care about women, but because they didn't need women to feel complete. This distinction is critical. Caring about someone versus needing them, appreciating someone versus requiring them, being enhanced by a relationship versus being defined by it. When your worth comes from within, when your life has meaning regardless of her presence, something shifts in the dynamic. Her dissatisfaction becomes her experience, not your emergency. Her moods become her responsibility, not your failure. Her evaluation of you becomes one opinion among many, not the defining verdict on your value. This doesn't mean being callous or indifferent. It means recognizing that you can't control her biology any more than she can. You can't eliminate the perpetual evaluation. You can't satisfy the insatiable. You can't logic your way past biological imperatives, but you can stop making her satisfaction your mission. You can stop organizing your life around achieving the impossible. You can stop measuring your worth by her approval. Schopenhauer argued that this internal sovereignty is what actually maintains attraction longer than any other strategy, because it addresses the biological signals her unconscious is reading. A man whose mood doesn't swing with hers signals emotional strength. A man whose direction doesn't change based on her criticism signals high value. A man who can walk away if necessary signals options. And these signals maintain attraction in a way that devotion and accommodation never can. But here's what most men miss. This isn't a performance. You can't fake sovereignty. If you're pretending to be unaffected while secretly desperate for her approval, she'll sense the inauthenticity. Biology is incredibly skilled at detecting false signals. Real sovereignty comes from actually building a life that matters to you independent of her response. From actually developing your character, your purpose, your mission. From actually being the kind of man you respect, regardless of whether she's there or not. This is why Schopenhauer believed most men fail with women. Not because they're not good enough, but because they're not themselves. Their performance is designed to generate female approval. And performances, no matter how skilled, eventually break down under pressure. The irony is profound. Men abandon their authentic nature to become what they think women want. And in doing so, they eliminate the very traits that generate genuine attraction: sovereignty, independence, authenticity, groundedness. So the answer isn't learning better techniques for managing female psychology. It's stopping the attempt to manage it at all. It's building such a strong internal foundation that her biological imperatives become irrelevant to your sense of self. You pursue your goals whether she supports them or not. You maintain your standards whether she meets them or not. You live according to your values whether she appreciates them or not. Not from stubbornness, but from clarity. Not from reaction, but from sovereignty. And paradoxically, this is what creates the possibility of actual partnership. Not two incomplete people desperately trying to complete each other, but two whole people choosing to walk together because it enhances both their paths, not because either needs it to survive. But this raises the ultimate question. If female satisfaction is impossible and sovereignty is the answer, does that mean relationships themselves are worth the effort? That's what we need to explore in the final part. And Schopenhauer's answer might surprise you. Here's the question Schopenhauer forces you to confront. If you understand female nature clearly, if you see the patterns that can't be changed, if you recognize the biological imperatives that will never fully align with your needs, is engaging in relationships at all worth it? He didn't give a universal answer, because the answer depends entirely on what you value and what you're willing to tolerate. But he did offer a framework for making the decision consciously instead of stumbling into it blindly. First, abandon the romantic illusion completely. Stop believing that the right woman will be different. Stop thinking that enough effort will create permanent satisfaction. Stop hoping that eventually you'll find someone whose biology doesn't operate according to these patterns. She doesn't exist. Every woman, regardless of how exceptional she appears, operates from the same fundamental biological imperatives. Some are more conscious of these drives. Some fight against them more successfully, but none transcend them entirely. Schopenhauer believed that men who enter relationships while still clinging to romantic illusions are setting themselves up for inevitable disappointment and resentment, because reality will eventually collide with fantasy. And when it does, most men interpret the collision as personal failure rather than natural law. So the first step is radical acceptance. This is how female nature works. This is what you're signing up for. Go in with eyes open or don't go in at all. Second, reframe what relationships are actually for. If they won't provide permanent satisfaction, constant appreciation, or unwavering loyalty, what's the point? Schopenhauer would argue that relationships serve several legitimate purposes when approached consciously. They provide companionship, though not completion. They offer growth opportunities, though not comfort. They create space for intimacy, though not worship. They can enhance life, though not define it. But all of this requires maintaining your sovereignty. The moment you make her satisfaction your primary goal, the moment you organize your existence around her approval, you've lost the frame that makes the relationship viable. The relationship works when it's an addition to your life, not the foundation of it. When it enhances your mission instead of becoming your mission. When it provides value without requiring you to sacrifice yourself. Third, choose strategically if you choose at all. Not every woman expresses these biological patterns with the same intensity. Not every woman is equally unconscious of her own nature. Not every woman makes her perpetual evaluation your problem constantly. Find one who's aware enough to recognize her own drives, who catches herself when she's being unreasonable, who distinguishes between legitimate needs and biological imperatives that can never be satisfied, who owns her psychology instead of making it your responsibility. These women are rare, but they exist, and they're the only ones worth committing to long-term, because they'll work with you to navigate biology instead of being unconsciously controlled by it. Fourth, maintain the option to walk away, not as a threat, not as manipulation, but as a genuine reality. Schopenhauer knew that the moment walking away becomes impossible, whether due to financial entanglement, emotional dependency, or fear of being alone, you lose all leverage. And without leverage, you're at the mercy of dynamics you can't control. This doesn't mean being cold or uncommitted. It means never being so invested that her dissatisfaction can destroy you. Never being so dependent that you'll tolerate anything to keep her. Never being so afraid of loss that you'll abandon yourself to prevent it. Finally, use the relationship as a forge, not to make her happy, which is impossible, but to develop yourself into a man who can't be broken by the inherent difficulties of human connection. Patience, strength, the ability to maintain frame under pressure, the capacity to care without being controlled. These are valuable traits regardless of whether this specific relationship lasts. You're not trying to win her perpetual satisfaction. You're using the relationship to become the kind of man who doesn't need it. And that transformation has value that extends far beyond any single connection. So what did Schopenhauer know about women that men still don't understand? That female nature operates from biological imperatives that often contradict stated preferences. That perpetual evaluation and dissatisfaction are features, not bugs. That worship and accommodation undermine attraction. That sovereignty and independence maintain it. But more importantly, he understood that seeing this clearly isn't about becoming bitter. It's about becoming free. Free from false expectations, free from impossible standards, free from organizing your life around achieving what biology designed to be unachievable. The choice is yours. Engage with eyes open or don't engage at all. But whatever you choose, choose it consciously. That's the only real power available. If this perspective resonates, write in the comments, "I see clearly now." And remember, Schopenhauer wasn't trying to make you hate women. He was trying to free you from illusions that make you hate yourself when reality doesn't match fantasy. That freedom is the only victory that matters.